Why did the silence feel heavier than the weight of her rifle? Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the training field, the morning sun slicing through the mist like a quiet judgment. Around her, soldiers prepared for another day, voices low, movements efficient, tension unmistakable. But for Sarah, this morning wasn't routine. It was the one she had been waiting for her entire career. She adjusted her combat boots, the familiar creak of worn leather grounding her nerves. At 26, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most disciplined soldiers in her unit, calm under pressure, sharp in judgment, relentless in training. Yet no number of drills or commendations could quiet the whisper that had followed her since enlistment. She's good but not SEAL good. She heard it in locker room jokes, in sideways glances during briefings, in the quiet disbelief that seemed to hang in the air whenever her name appeared beside male counterparts. She didn't hate them for it. Doubt had simply become the background noise of her life, a sound she'd learned to live with, even draw strength from. The rumor mill had started weeks earlier. Commander Jackson had announced that a select few would join an elite joint exercise with the Navy SEALs. It wasn't just a training program. It was a proving ground, an unspoken test of who truly belonged among the best. Only a handful from each division would be chosen. When the final list was posted on the barracks wall, Sarah's name sat there, printed in bold black ink. The silence that followed had been deafening. "You sure you're ready for this, Martinez?" Staff Sergeant Williams had asked that day, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "These aren't weekend warriors. These are SEALs. They eat people like us for breakfast." Sarah had looked up from her bunk, her expression unreadable. "Then I hope they're hungry," she'd said quietly. That answer had traveled through the barracks faster than any official memo. Some laughed, others rolled their eyes. But Sarah meant every word. For years she'd been told what she wasn't, too small, too idealistic, too ambitious. She was done proving herself in whispers. This week she would prove it in silence, on the mat, in the mud, under fire. As the compound stirred to life, the faint sound of engines echoed from beyond the perimeter fence. Then came the vehicles, matte black, unmarked, moving with purpose. The SEALs had arrived. They stepped out with the quiet precision of predators, each movement measured, efficient. Even before introductions, it was obvious. They were different. Their confidence wasn't loud, it was heavy, the kind that filled a room without sound. And then she saw him. Master Chief Petty Officer Derek Stone. He moved like the ground respected him. 6'4", built from discipline rather than vanity, arms marked with scars that told stories no one would ever read. His face was carved from the kind of experience that only came from staring at death and not blinking. There was no arrogance in his eyes, just certainty, the kind that made even seasoned soldiers stand straighter. He was everything she had been warned about, and everything she needed to face. The assembly hall buzzed as over 100 soldiers gathered for the introduction ceremony. The air felt dense, charged with the awareness that this week would not be ordinary. Stone took the stage, his presence commanding instant silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low but carrying easily through the hall. "We're not here to flatter your egos. We're here to break them and build something stronger in their place." Every word landed like a weight. "Some of you think you know combat. You don't. Not yet. By the end of this week, you'll either prove you belong or you'll wish you hadn't volunteered." He scanned the crowd. His gaze stopped on Sarah for a fraction too long. She met it without flinching. The air between them felt electric, charged with unspoken challenge. Stone continued, outlining the week ahead. Obstacle courses redesigned by SEALs, survival drills under pressure, advanced combat evaluations, and a final demonstration no one yet understood. His tone was even, his intent absolute. When the briefing ended, soldiers broke into small groups for their first assignments. Sarah's name appeared on the roster for Group Alpha, Stone's own command unit. Coincidence? Hardly. The others in her group were the best their units had to offer, physically imposing, decorated, confident. They greeted each other with competitive smiles that barely hid the doubt directed at her. Sarah ignored it. Doubt didn't need to be silenced. It just needed to be outrun. The first test was deceptively simple, an obstacle course. Every soldier had done it hundreds of times, but this wasn't the base's standard track. Stone's version was different. Higher walls, deeper mud pits, weighted gear, and traps designed to test not just muscle but the mind behind it. "The record is 4 minutes 37 seconds, Stone announced, pointing at one of his men. "Johnson holds it, beat it, or at least try." The first few attempts were impressive, each soldier finishing between 6 and 8 minutes. Sweat, dirt, curses, the usual symphony of effort. Then Stone called her name. "Martinez, let's see what you've got." Sarah stepped forward, calm and composed. She checked her laces, tightened her gloves, and nodded to the timer. "Don't hurt yourself trying to impress us," Stone said, the faintest smirk in his tone. "Sometimes knowing your limits is more important than exceeding them." She didn't answer. The timer beeped and she moved. She attacked the course like water finding its path. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Her smaller frame slid through tight tunnels others struggled with. Her endurance carried her through the mud pits without slowing. She vaulted, climbed, crawled, adapted. By the final stretch, the shouts around her had faded into background noise. All she could hear was her breath and the timer's relentless tick. When she crossed the finish line, the screen flashed 4:41. 4 seconds slower than the record. A murmur rippled through the crowd, followed by a cheer that filled the training field. Stone's face remained unreadable. He stepped forward, towering over her as she caught her breath. "Impressive," he said quietly, "but that was just warm-up." Sarah didn't smile, understood Master Chief. He studied her for a beat longer before turning to the group. "Reset the course. Next group." That night the barracks buzzed with talk. Some called it luck, others called it skill. Sarah didn't join the conversation. She cleaned her rifle, stretched her shoulders, and stared at the ceiling until the lights went out. She knew Stone wasn't finished testing her. The obstacle course was just the introduction. The real fight hadn't started yet. The next morning began before dawn. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs. The soldiers gathered in the gymnasium, mats covering the floor. Stone stood at the center, his tone crisp. "When your weapon jams or runs dry, your body becomes the weapon," he said. "Today, you'll learn what that means." What followed was brutal, beautiful choreography. SEALs demonstrating techniques that turned leverage into power, balance into control, and hesitation into defeat. Every movement was designed for efficiency, for survival. Sarah watched intently, her mind cataloging details, the angle of the wrist, the shift of weight before a strike, the rhythm of offense and defense. Then came practice. Pairs formed across the mat. Sarah was assigned to Corporal Davis, a disciplined, careful partner who outweighed her by 60 pounds. They drilled sequences, each strike controlled, each throw measured. Stone moved among them, offering quiet corrections. His gaze lingered on Sarah more than once. And then he called her out. Martinez stepped forward. Every head turned. The room went still. "I want to demonstrate something," Stone said, motioning her to the center. "Combat isn't about size or strength. It's about control." Sarah nodded once, stepping into position. "You'll be the attacker. I'll defend. Begin when ready." The circle widened, breath held. Sarah moved first, a clean sequence of strikes, textbook perfect. Stone countered easily, his movements calm, precise, even casual. "Notice how I'm using her momentum against her," he said to the others, still controlling her attacks. But Sarah could feel it, the shift in his rhythm, the counters getting sharper, the blocks heavier. The line between demonstration and competition began to blur. "Try harder, Martinez," Stone murmured. Real enemies don't hold back. Challenge accepted. Sarah's focus narrowed. She adjusted her stance, let go of hesitation, and attacked again, faster, sharper, unexpected. Her strikes changed tempo, mixing styles, flowing from Krav Maga to Jiu-Jitsu transitions. The room's energy changed. The demonstration was gone. This was a duel. Stone adapted quickly, his defense turning aggressive. For minutes they moved, each exchange faster than the last, a rhythm of breath, sweat, and impact. Soldiers around them whispered in disbelief. When Stone finally called, "Enough!" both stood breathing hard, neither broken, neither victorious. He studied her for a long moment. "You've had advanced training," he said. "Yes, Master Chief," Sarah replied evenly. "Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, and boxing I train off-duty." Stone's expression softened slightly. "Tomorrow we go further." When she returned to her bunk, the barracks felt different. Eyes followed her, not with mockery now but curiosity. Respect, maybe. But Sarah knew respect was fragile. You didn't hold it by talking. You earned it again tomorrow. She sat on her bunk, staring at her hands, red, raw, steady. Then whispered quietly to herself, almost like a promise. "They wanted to see if I could survive their world. Tomorrow, I'll show them I belong in it." And as the base lights dimmed, Sarah closed her eyes and breathed in the metallic scent of sweat and dust, her silent prayer before the storm. Because tomorrow wasn't just another day. It was the beginning of something that would either make her legend or end her career entirely. The alarm broke the silence before sunrise. 4:30 hours. Sarah's eyes opened the moment the buzzer hit. No hesitation, no stretch, no groan. Her body moved before her thoughts caught up. Years of conditioning had made waking up this way feel natural, like muscle memory running before her mind could interfere. The air outside the barracks was cold enough to bite. Soldiers gathered, half awake but trying to look alert. Their breath rose in small, ghostly clouds beneath the dim floodlights. The compound was quiet, save for the rhythmic sound of boots forming lines. Then came the voice. "Form up." Stone's tone carried through the morning haze like a command carved into steel. He stood at the front, unshaven, unshaken, every movement deliberate. He didn't look tired. He never did. Some men wore exhaustion, others carried it as a medal. Stone was the latter. "Today's focus is close-quarters combat," he said. "When weapons fail, instinct decides. When everything's taken from you, only your will remains. That's what we're testing." The group listened in silence. The word testing always meant something different when Stone said it. It wasn't an evaluation, it was a mirror. You'd see who you were when everything else was stripped away. Inside the gym, mats covered the floor. The air smelled faintly of sweat and discipline. The SEALs demonstrated the techniques, sharp, efficient movements that left no room for hesitation. Every throw, every counter, every takedown spoke of repetition honed into instinct. Sarah stood in the second row, watching, studying. She wasn't there to imitate. She was there to understand the rhythm behind the violence, the space between movement and reaction. When the time came to pair off, she was assigned again to Corporal Davis, a decent partner, strong, cautious, respectful. But as they moved through the drills, she could feel Stone's eyes on her, not just observing, assessing. Every shift of her weight, every angle of her wrist, he noticed. She could feel the attention, heavy as armor, and she knew what it meant. He wasn't just testing her skill, he was testing her composure under scrutiny. Minutes passed like hours. The sound of bodies hitting mats echoed across the gym. Commands, corrections, grunts of exertion. The rhythm of training filled the air until... Martinez. The word cut through everything. Sarah froze mid-movement, turning toward him. "Step forward." Davis stepped back immediately, and the other soldiers instinctively cleared a space. Everyone knew what was coming. Stone gestured toward the center mat. "We're going to demonstrate something important." His tone was calm, but Sarah heard the undercurrent beneath it, the same subtle provocation he'd used the day before. This wasn't just a teaching moment. It was another test. She stepped forward, chin high, heartbeat steady. "This demonstration," Stone said, addressing the group, "is about technique, not dominance. Watch closely." He turned to Sarah. "Attack when ready." Sarah nodded once, positioning herself. The world narrowed to the circle of mats beneath her feet. No audience, no noise, just her and him. She struck first, a controlled jab combination, followed by a sweep. Stone blocked easily, turning the motion into a teaching point for the class. "Leverage," he said, his voice smooth. "Always use your opponent's energy against them." He pivoted, redirecting her momentum. She rolled, recovered, and came at him again. Another block, another lecture to the crowd. But his tone shifted, subtly, a challenge hiding behind the calm. "Try harder, Sergeant." She met his eyes. There it was, the spark. The match changed. The pace quickened. His blocks became counters. His holds became traps. Every movement hit harder, closer. To the untrained eye, it still looked like a demonstration, but the soldiers watching closely could see the truth. This was becoming a fight. Sarah adapted instantly. Gone was the predictable sequence of drills. Her movements turned unpredictable, fluid transitions between techniques he hadn't demonstrated. Stone's expression hardened. The air around them seemed to tighten. She struck again, aiming for control, not damage, but the energy had changed. The mat under them became a silent battlefield. Minutes blurred together. No one spoke. The entire gym seemed to hold its breath. Then suddenly Stone disengaged, raised a hand. "Enough." Silence. Both were breathing hard. Sweat rolled down Sarah's temple. Stone's voice returned to its calm register. "Good," he said finally. "That's what I wanted them to see. Control, composure, adaptability." He looked at her. No smirk this time, just quiet assessment. "You've trained outside the military, haven't you?" "Yes, Master Chief. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, boxing, on my own time." Stone nodded slowly, thoughtful. "That shows." The class ended, but the whispers didn't. By evening, word had spread across the base. The story grew with each retelling, how the SEAL leader had gone toe-to-toe with a female sergeant and hadn't been able to dominate. Some said it was staged. Others said Stone had been surprised. Either way, the myth was already forming. Sarah ignored the talk. Myths didn't win wars. That night she sat on her bunk, cleaning her sidearm in the dim light. Her reflection in the steel slide stared back at her, steady, unreadable. Her hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but her eyes burned with clarity. Every test he gave her wasn't just about combat. It was about restraint. He was watching how she reacted to pressure, to doubt, to provocation. And she knew she hadn't seen the last of it. The next morning brought something different. Weapons training, advanced. The kind reserved for soldiers who might someday be trusted with missions they couldn't talk about. Stone led the session personally. "In the field," he said, "you won't always have the luxury of your standard gear. Weapons jam, ammo runs out, you adapt or you die." He motioned toward a line of tables covered with unfamiliar firearms and improvised weapons. "You'll learn to make anything lethal and effective." Sarah was assigned to the final scenario of the day, a building clearance simulation using an unfamiliar rifle. The setup was simple, a dark, multi-room facility filled with hidden targets and simulated civilian obstacles. The challenge wasn't just marksmanship, it was judgment. Stone watched her closely. She entered the structure, moving low and silent. Her pulse slowed to match her breathing, every step calculated, every corner cleared with precision. The weapon was heavier than she liked. The balance was different, but adaptability was her strength. Halfway through, a target appeared behind what looked like civilian cover. A split-second decision. A moral test wrapped inside a tactical one. Sarah hesitated just long enough to choose. She shifted position, used a ricochet shot, non-lethal but disabling. When the buzzer signaled completion, she stepped out, weapon lowered. Stone stood waiting, arms folded, his expression unreadable. "Time?" he asked. 6 minutes, 19 seconds, one of his men reported. Stone nodded. Accuracy 98%. The number hung in the air, higher than most SEALs that day. Stone met her eyes. "Outstanding work, Sergeant. Tactical judgment excellent." It wasn't just praise, it was acknowledgement. That small nod meant more than any medal. But with it came a new kind of weight, because she knew what would follow. The higher you climbed, the smaller the margin for error, and the greater the fall if you slipped. The rest of the day blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion. Muscle memory took over where thought ended. By sunset, she'd lost count of how many drills she'd run. When the call finally came for evening assembly, Sarah felt the ache in her bones. But when she saw Stone standing in front of the group, perfectly composed, the fatigue vanished. He scanned the crowd. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll test something different, not just skill, not just judgment, leadership." A pause. His gaze found hers again. "Some of you think leadership means giving orders. You'll find out it means something else entirely." His tone was even, but the implication was clear. She was being prepared for something specific, something bigger than the others realized. That night, lying in the dark, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her body was tired, but her mind replayed every detail. The way Stone's eyes tracked her during combat, the subtle shift in his tone when she excelled. Was he trying to break her or build her? The line between test and opportunity was thin, and she couldn't yet tell which side she stood on. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the roof like a quiet metronome. She closed her eyes and listened, imagining the next day. The sound of boots, the weight of orders, the way eyes would turn toward her again, waiting to see if she could lead men who still weren't sure she belonged among them. But fear wasn't part of her vocabulary anymore. Determination was. And as she drifted into uneasy sleep, her final thought was simple, almost defiant. "If they doubt me tomorrow, I'll make sure they remember the mistake." Why did command always sound heavier when it wasn't hers to give? The morning air smelled of metal and rain-soaked dust as Sarah tightened her gear and fell into formation. Her muscles protested every movement, but she didn't show it. Pain was private. The moment you let it speak, it owned you. Stone stood at the front again, expression unreadable, eyes like gunmetal. Around him, the SEAL team moved with that same unnerving stillness that spoke louder than shouting. "Today," he said, "you'll operate as units. No one wins alone. Leadership isn't about being obeyed, it's about being followed when it matters most." The soldiers exchanged glances. They knew what that meant: chaos drills. No pre-written orders, no time to plan. Just a scenario, a clock, and judgment. Stone divided them into teams of 4. Sarah caught her assignment, Team Echo, paired with 2 of her own and 1 SEAL, Petty Officer Rodriguez. She'd heard of him, tactical genius, field calm, one of Stone's best. As they gathered near the simulation area, Rodriguez gave her a polite nod. "You're the recon lead." "Yes," she replied, "eyes and intel." He studied her for a beat, then smiled slightly. "Good. Just don't get yourself killed before I finish my coffee." It wasn't disrespectful. It was banter, the kind that carried a hint of camaraderie. Maybe word of her previous performances had traveled further than she thought. The mission brief was simple on paper. Simulated hostage rescue in a multi-story compound, unknown number of hostiles, civilians inside. The complexity lay in the unknown. Stone's final words before the drill echoed. "Assume nothing, react to everything." The buzzer sounded. Sarah moved first, sliding into the shadows of the mock urban structure. The rifle felt natural in her hands, weight balanced, scope calibrated. She advanced through the first corridor, every step silent, controlled. Her radio crackled softly. "Echo 2 in position," one teammate whispered. "Copy," she murmured back. Seconds stretched. The building breathed with them, the sound of distant boots, creaking doors, muffled shouts that felt too real. Sarah raised a fist. "Stop." Her eyes caught the faint reflection of a target's scope in a doorway mirror. She signaled silently, and Rodriguez moved to cover. One breath, two. Then the flash, 2 rounds center mass, target down. They advanced floor by floor. Each decision had to be instant: threat or civilian, clear or conceal, advance or fall back. Sarah's voice remained steady over comms, giving short, precise commands. By the time they reached the final floor, their simulated casualties were 0. The hostages, rubber mannequins in fatigues, were secured. The buzzer ended the drill. "Exercise complete," the voice over the PA announced. Stone stepped forward from the observation deck, his boots echoing in the silence that followed. "That," he said, "was textbook execution." He looked directly at Sarah. "Martinez, your recon data made that possible." The compliment landed like a quiet shock. The other soldiers looked between them, respect edging out whatever doubt had lingered. Rodriguez nodded toward her as they cleared the room. "I've seen seasoned teams mess that scenario up. You ran it like you've done it 100 times." Sarah exhaled slowly, lowering her rifle. "Guess I got lucky." He shook his head. "Luck doesn't call the shots that fast." The rest of the afternoon was a blur of back-to-back drills, leadership under fatigue, coordination without comms, decision-making under simulated fire. Each exercise stripped away certainty until instinct was all that remained. Sarah led again twice that day. Each time her team finished among the top performers, but what mattered wasn't the ranking, it was how the men looked at her afterward, not as the outlier or the token, but as the one who got them through. During the final debrief, Stone's tone softened in a way few had heard before. "Leadership isn't about shouting louder," he said, packing slowly in front of them. "It's about quiet decisions that keep your people alive. Today, a few of you proved you understand that." His gaze flicked toward her, brief, intentional. When the session ended, soldiers filed out talking quietly, exhaustion etched into every movement. Sarah lingered behind, wiping her hands on a towel, her heartbeat finally slowing. She didn't expect him to approach, but he did. "Martinez," Stone said, voice lower now, "walk with me." They stepped out into the fatting light. The sky above the compound burned gold at the edges, the kind of evening that pretends the world is peaceful. "I've watched you these past 3 days," Stone began. "You don't just react, you calculate. You stay calm under fire, that's rare." Sarah stayed quiet, unsure if it was praise or setup. He glanced at her. "You ever wonder why we test like this?" "To find weakness," she said. He shook his head. "To find truth. Weakness just shows us where to look." They walked a few more steps before he stopped. "Tomorrow's drills will be different. Unscripted scenarios, real-time chaos, no safety nets." Sarah nodded, understood. Stone studied her, something unreadable behind his eyes. "You keep surprising me, Sergeant. I'm not sure if that's good or dangerous yet." She met his gaze evenly. "Maybe both." For the first time he almost smiled. "Get some rest, you'll need it." That night sleep didn't come easily. The barracks were quiet except for the soft breathing of exhausted soldiers. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. What did it mean to be seen by someone like Stone? Not as a soldier to be corrected, but as an equal to be measured against. Respect felt heavier than judgment. It carried expectation, and expectation carried danger. She turned on her side and closed her eyes. Outside, thunder rumbled far away. The storm was moving closer. The fourth day began with chaos. Before dawn, alarms blared across the base, loud, piercing, unmistakable. Soldiers jumped from their bunks, grabbing gear and weapons. Stone's voice cut through the noise. Field exercise, real-time simulation, move. The compound had transformed overnight into a war zone replica. Smoke grenades, sirens, flashbang echoes. Teams scattered into different zones, each given fragmentary intel and impossible timelines. Sarah's assignment came fast. Coordinate and evac under fire, multiple civilian actors, wounded personnel, unknown hostiles. No map, no plan, just instinct. Her boots hit the mud as she sprinted across the mock field. Rain from the night before had turned the ground into a slick mess. The simulated gunfire cracked overhead. Shouts and commands mixed into a wall of sound. She ducked behind a half-collapsed barrier, pulling her radio to her mouth. Echo Team, report status. Echo 2 down, simulated, a voice came back. Echo 3 pinned. Hold position, she replied. Flank route through the drainage ditch. She scanned the chaos around her, spotted a flash of movement. A civilian actor stumbling out of cover, screaming. Without thinking, she broke position, sliding across mud to pull them behind a barrier. It wasn't real, but her heartbeat didn't know the difference. Her radio crackled again. Martinez, we're cut off. Not for long, she muttered. She recalculated fast, 3 moves ahead. Rodriguez, suppress fire on the left corridor. I'm pushing center. Copy. The plan unfolded like a reflex. Every order met with precision response. Within minutes, the path cleared and the evac convoy rolled through. When the final mission complete sounded, Sarah sank to her knees, chest heaving, adrenaline flooding her veins. Then applause erupted from somewhere beyond the smoke. Stone emerged, flanked by 2 instructors, arms folded. Efficient, adaptive, controlled, he said, voice carrying above the din. That's how you survive when the world falls apart. He stepped closer, lowering his tone. You didn't just pass today's test, Sergeant. You rewrote it. For a second, neither of them spoke. The storm wind moved through the training field, carrying the smell of burnt powder and wet earth. Sarah met his gaze. You said you wanted truth, she said quietly. That's mine. He nodded once, and it's damn hard to ignore. By nightfall, exhaustion settled into the compound like fog. Soldiers limped back to barracks, too drained to talk, but Sarah couldn't shake the echo of his words. You rewrote it. In the small mirror by her bunk, she saw mud streaked across her face, eyes ringed with fatigue, but there was something else there too, resolve sharper than before. Across the base, the SEALs met privately with Stone. She didn't know what they discussed, but when he emerged hours later, his expression carried the same focus he'd had before a deployment. Something was coming, something beyond another drill. The next day would decide everything. Sarah didn't know yet that it would end with over 100 soldiers watching her step into a ring. She wasn't supposed to win. That tomorrow, she wouldn't just fight for respect. She'd fight to redefine it. And somewhere deep down, she felt it already. The quiet shift in the air before impact, the kind of silence that always came before history rewrote itself. Because sometimes destiny didn't arrive with trumpets. It arrived at 4:30, wearing mud, sweat, and the weight of a challenge whispered by a man who'd never been beaten. Why did it feel like the air itself was waiting for something? The morning light barely reached through the clouds, painting the compound in pale gray. Sarah adjusted her vest, double-checked her sidearm, and tried not to think about how quiet it was. No orders, no briefing, just stillness, the kind that came before everything changed. Then came the call. All personnel to Field Grid C immediate. The voice over the intercom belonged to Stone, calm, direct, and final. Sarah joined the steady march toward the training field, her boots sinking slightly in the damp dirt from last night's storm. The others were silent too. Even the jokes, the usual defense against nerves, had vanished. When they reached the field, she saw what awaited them, chaos disguised as training. The area had been transformed into a labyrinth of barriers, vehicles, debris, smoke canisters, and elevated scaffolds. It wasn't one scenario. It was dozens, stacked, layered, shifting. It looked less like a military exercise and more like a city in the middle of collapse. Stone stood at the center, clipboard in hand, expression impassive. "Today," he said, "you'll learn what real unpredictability feels like. No instructions, no safety and procedure. You'll be dropped into a situation that changes faster than you can think. Survive, adapt, lead." Someone from the back called out, "Sir, what's the objective?" Stone looked up, eyes cold as glass. "The objective is to find one." The field fell silent. Sarah's team was among the first to be deployed. They were given a single piece of information: civilian evacuation compromised, unknown hostiles in the zone, command unavailable. Then the siren blared. The world erupted. Smoke filled the air, gunfire simulations cracking across the field. From somewhere behind the barriers, a recording played of distant explosions and shouting. Every few seconds, loudspeakers broadcast fragments of fake orders, contradictory, confusing. Sarah hit the dirt, scanning her surroundings. Her team scattered into cover, returning simulated fire with blanks. The chaos was complete and deliberate. She crawled toward a broken wall, radio pressed to her ear. "Echo 2, report." Static, then, "We're pinned at Sector 9, can't tell where fire's coming from." She scanned through the smoke, spotting movement, 2 friendlies caught in crossfire. No clear angle. "Hold your position," she ordered. "I'm moving." She darted between obstacles, keeping low, trusting instinct more than the fatting maps in her head. Every muscle burned. Every heartbeat was loud enough to drown out thought. As she reached the pinned soldiers, one of them yelled, "We've got a civilian down." She turned, saw the mannequin, the symbolic casualty. The exercise wasn't random after all. It was layered with decisions meant to tear leadership apart. Who do you save? How much do you risk? "Smoke out," she ordered. Her teammate tossed a canister. The field filled with thick white fog. In those few seconds of cover, Sarah dragged the civilian dummy clear while the others laid suppressive fire. Her voice was steady, even as her pulse fought to break free. When they regrouped behind the last barricade, her radio clicked again. Stone's voice this time. "Martinez status. Evac complete. 1 simulated casualty, Sector 9 cleared," she replied, breathing hard. There was a pause before he answered, "Copy that." It wasn't just acknowledgement, it was approval, the kind he rarely gave. The simulation continued for hours. Each round harder, faster, less predictable. Fires started. Communications jammed. Hostiles appeared from nowhere. Soldiers broke formation, regrouped, improvised. Sarah noticed something strange. Every time she led, her section stabilized. When she rotated out, chaos spread again. It wasn't about strength or rank, it was about calm. By the time the final whistle blew, most soldiers looked half dead from exhaustion. Mud covered their faces, eyes hollowed from focus. But Sarah still stood tall, worn, yes, but steady. Stone gathered them in formation, his voice echoing over the field. "Combat doesn't wait for your confidence," he said. "It demands it. What I saw today was the difference between those who survive and those who lead." His gaze locked onto Sarah. "And some of you are learning to lead in ways I didn't expect." She held his stare, silent. He looked away first. That night, rain began again. Sarah sat alone under the metal awning outside the barracks, watching water stream across the concrete. The storm softened the edges of the base, the fences, the towers, the walls, all blurred into gray. She thought about Stone, about the way he spoke, the way he tested her, the the way he never quite smiled even when he seemed impressed. He wasn't trying to break her anymore, he was studying her. And that was worse. Because breaking was simple, you knew where the pain came from. But being studied meant someone saw something in you didn't yet see in yourself. Her thoughts were interrupted by footsteps. Rodriguez stepped out from the rain carrying 2 metal mugs. Coffee, thought you'd need it. She took it with a small nod. Thanks. He sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. For a while they said nothing, just listened to the rain and the far-off hum of generators. Finally he said, "You know, the guys were talking today. Most think you're going to outscore everyone on this course." Sarah smirked faintly. Most also thought I wouldn't last the week. "Yeah," he said, grinning. "They're not always quick learners." She looked out toward the training field again, quiet. "You've worked with Stone for years, right?" Rodriguez nodded. 8 give or take, why? What's his angle? He doesn't test people this hard for no reason. Rodriguez thought for a moment. Stone believes real strength reveals itself when no one's sure what's happening. He pushes until people stop performing and start being. The mask falls off. What's left, that's the truth. Sarah nodded slowly. And if he doesn't like what he finds? Then he breaks you down and starts again. But if he does like it, Rodriguez looked at her meaningfully, you won't just pass this program. You'll be invited to something else. She frowned slightly. Something else. He didn't answer, just took a long sip from his mug. You'll find out soon enough. When he left, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Sarah sat for a long time thinking about his words, something else. By the time she went back inside, the others were asleep. She sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at the wall until her vision blurred from exhaustion. Then finally, she let herself fall into sleep that felt more like unconsciousness. She didn't know how long she'd been out when the voice woke her. "Sergeant Martinez, report to the training hall now." "Stone." Her body reacted before her mind could question it. She threw on her jacket and boots, the world still half dark outside. When she reached the hall, it was empty except for him. No lights, just dim floodlamps reflecting off the mats. He stood in the center, arms crossed. "Sir," she said, stopping at attention. "Relax," Stone said. "This isn't official." He gestured toward the mat. "You've been tested for skill, adaptability, and leadership. Tomorrow's demonstration will test something else." "Which is?" "Composure under absolute pressure." Sarah felt a chill, though the air was warm. "What kind of demonstration?" He hesitated. "You'll find out tomorrow. For now, I need to know something." He stepped closer, his presence as heavy as ever. "What drives you, Sergeant? I've seen ambition, I've seen defiance, but you, it's something different." Sarah held his gaze. "I don't like proving people wrong, Master Chief. I like proving myself right." The faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. "Good answer." Then his tone shifted, softer, quieter. "Tomorrow won't be like anything we've done. There will be an audience, a big one. Command wants to see what you're capable of." She felt her stomach tighten. "Understood." "You've earned this, Martinez," he said, "but it's not going to feel like reward." He turned, walking toward the exit. Before he reached the door, he added, "Get some rest. You'll need it. Tomorrow, you're not just representing yourself. You're representing what people still think can't be done." The door shut behind him, leaving her in silence. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty mat beneath her feet. Her reflection stared back in the faint light. A woman who had clawed her way through every layer of expectation and still somehow wasn't done climbing. Then she whispered to the silence, "Whatever tomorrow is, I'm ready." Morning came with an energy she could feel before she saw it. The compound buzzed differently. Vehicles lined the lot. High-ranking officers she'd never seen before walked the perimeter. Soldiers whispered as she passed, their voices carrying fragments of rumor. Something was coming, and everyone knew it. At 900, a message went out. All personnel report to the main training facility. Sarah tightened her gloves, her heartbeat steady now. No fear, just focus. When she stepped inside, her breath caught. The hall had been transformed into a circular amphitheater. Bleachers rose around a large open mat. Over 100 soldiers and officers filled the seats. At the center stood Stone, waiting. And in that instant she understood. This wasn't just another test, it was a stage. And whatever was about to happen, she was at its center. The hum of the crowd softened when Stone raised his hand. Over the past week, he began, we've tested every aspect of performance, strength, endurance, judgment, adaptability. But the true measure of a soldier lies in what happens when they face the impossible. He paused, his eyes finding her across the room. Today, he said, we'll see that measure. A murmur ran through the audience as she stepped forward, boots echoing against the mat. The lights above seemed brighter than usual, the air thicker. And when she stopped across from Stone, every whisper in the room faded into silence. Because everyone already knew what was coming. He didn't need to say the words. This was the final test. Her against him. And the outcome, whatever it would be, would echo far beyond that room. Would you like me to continue with part 5? The full cinematic fight and emotional climax. The 100-soldier audience showdown where she breaks Stone's ribs and changes everything. Sure thing, next comes the heart of the film. The live audience duel that turns from demonstration into revelation. I'll carry the same narrator tone, clipped, emotional, immersive packing for a 50-minute voiceover. Approximately 1,600 words. Why did the silence sound like applause held hostage? Sarah could feel 100 sets of eyes, tracing every movement as she stepped onto the mat. The room had shape but no sound, only breath and tension. Across from her, Stone stood barefoot, sleeves rolled to the elbow, posture carved from discipline. No introductions, no ceremony, just the weight of what everyone already knew. He spoke softly, so the room had to lean in. This is a combat effectiveness demonstration. Full contact, controlled conditions. The goal is not victory, it's proof. But everyone understood. Proof and victory were the same thing. Ready? He asked. Sarah nodded once. The whistle snapped through the air. Stone moved first, fast, heavier than she expected, all momentum and precision. The mat thudded under his steps. She barely sidestepped the first strike, felt the wind of it graze her jaw. He was measuring her, not attacking yet, taking data the way a storm gauges a coastline. She countered with quick feints, keeping distance. Her training whispered, don't meet power head-on, redirect. Stone advanced again, a blur of control. A sweep, a grip, a throw. She rolled, landed on a knee, rose. The crowd murmured. Stone's voice cut through. Stay fluid, Martinez. It wasn't taunt or advice, it was both. She exhaled, shifted weight, changed rhythm. He came again, this. Why did time always slow down right before impact? Sarah's boots touched the mat and the world shrank to a circle. No past, no noise, just her and Stone. The air felt electric, charged with that quiet tension that only appears when everyone knows they're about to witness something that shouldn't happen. He moved first. A blur of mass and experience, every motion efficient, measured, lethal. His reach was twice hers, his strength unquestionable, but Sarah didn't flinch. She read him like a book in another language she had spent years learning to translate. The first strike came fast, a shoulder feint into a low kick. She blocked with her forearm, the vibration shooting up to her elbow. The next, a sweep meant to break her rhythm, she countered by shifting just enough for his momentum to slip past her. Stone adjusted instantly, testing her reaction speed. His face showed nothing but focus, but inside those movements was intent. He was trying to expose her limits. She didn't give him any. Her eyes tracked his center, not his hands. Combat wasn't about chasing the attack. It was about predicting where the truth would land. Around them, the soldiers sat silent, no laughter, no shouts, no bravado. Even the air conditioning hum seemed to fade. They were watching two worlds collide, the myth of invincibility meeting the proof of possibility. Stone launched another series, jab, strike, pivot, clean enough to end fights in seconds. Sarah slipped under the first, rolled with the second, turned his wrist and drove forward into his blind angle. The motion wasn't power, it was geometry. She let his energy complete the arc. He stumbled a half step, surprised. The room murmured. For a brief instant, she saw it, a flicker of respect in his eyes, gone as soon as it appeared. He pressed harder. The sound of their movements filled the hall, the dull slap of bare feet against mat, the hiss of breath, the solid crack of forearm meeting forearm. Sarah's lungs burned. Every heartbeat felt louder than the crowd. He changed tactics, grappling range. His strength dominated here. He closed the distance, arms locking around her shoulder, twisting. She slipped low, spinning under his hold, barely escaping a takedown that would have flattened anyone else. The soldiers watching leaned forward unconsciously, breath held. Stone wasn't toying with her anymore. He was fighting. Sarah adjusted, keeping her stance narrow, letting him chase angles he couldn't maintain. Her advantage was smaller but faster. Every second she survived eroded his certainty. Then came the mistake. Not hers, his. Overconfidence, a push too far. He lunged in with full commitment, a heavy grapple meant to crush resistance, the kind of move that worked on men his size. Sarah had been waiting for it. She pivoted, weight shifted, balance broken. And then instinct, honed by thousands of repetitions, took over. Her left hand caught his wrist, her right hooked behind his shoulder. She dropped low, using every ounce of his power against him. Momentum became weapon. A thud cracked through the hall as Stone hit the mat. The shock of it rippled through the crowd. For the first time, someone had put him down. He rolled, recovered fast, but his breathing changed deeper, heavier. His ribs brushed his elbow. Pain. Not defeat, not yet, but surprise laced with respect. Sarah didn't advance. She waited, controlled, calculated. He stood, straightened, circled. The silence was deafening. When he moved again, it wasn't with arrogance. It was with intent. He came faster, sharper, combinations flowing like water, no wasted motion. But Sarah wasn't reacting anymore. She was anticipating, reading, adapting. Every motion of his shoulders telegraphed the next second, and she countered before the attack arrived. A shift in footwork here, a sidestep there. His strikes began to miss by inches. Then she saw it. A tell, small but there. His left shoulder dipped slightly before every right cross, timing pattern exposed. She waited, one heartbeat, two. Then she struck. He came in the same combination, and she moved first, parrying his arm and spinning inside the guard. Her elbow slammed into his ribs with perfect precision. The sound wasn't loud, but everyone felt it. Stone gasped a short, involuntary breath. He stepped back, hand instinctively pressing to his side. The room froze. He straightened, pain flashing behind his eyes, then nodded once, a silent acknowledgement. But he didn't stop. He came again, stubborn, proud, throwing one last strike, one last attempt to reclaim momentum. She met him halfway, turned his motion into a lock, dropped her weight and pinned him to the mat. For a second, no one breathed. Then came the tap. 3 short, unmistakable taps on the mat. It was over. The sound echoed louder than any shout. Sarah released instantly, backing away, chest heaving, sweat streaking her face. She looked down at Stone, who lay on his side, ribs rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The entire room erupted. Not chaos, awe. 100 soldiers stood, clapping, cheering, shouting. not because they'd seen victory, but because they'd seen the unthinkable. Sarah didn't raise her arms, didn't smile. She simply stepped back, hands trembling from adrenaline. Stone rose a moment later, one hand still pressed to his ribs. He looked at her with something that wasn't defeat, it was something rarer: respect. He extended his hand. "Outstanding performance, Sergeant Martinez," he said, voice steady despite the pain. "That was exceptional technique." She shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Master Chief." He turned toward the crowd. "Let it be clear, this isn't about winning. It's about proving that standards don't care about gender or size or expectation. Capability defines the warrior, nothing else." The applause swelled again. Rodriguez, standing near the front row, grinned wide, shaking his head. "Damn," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "She actually did it." Sarah caught the words but didn't react. Her focus had drifted inward. The match replayed in her mind, every motion, every breath, every second of hesitation she'd buried. She hadn't fought to win. She fought to belong. And somehow, in proving herself, she had changed the room. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and medics had checked Stone's ribs, "Just bruised," they said, though everyone knew better. She sat alone on the bleachers, head bowed, hands folded loosely. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by something quieter, disbelief mixed with exhaustion. She'd done it. But instead of victory, she felt weight, the kind that comes from knowing nothing would ever be the same again. Stone approached quietly. His posture was slower now, his movements deliberate. "Hell of a day," he said. Sarah looked up, didn't expect it to end like this. He chuckled softly. "Neither did I." For a long moment they just sat in silence. The hall was empty now, except for the echoes of what had just happened. Stone finally said, "You changed some minds today, including mine." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "That wasn't my goal." "I know," he said. "That's why it worked." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Command been watching this program closely. You'll get a call soon. Evaluation for advanced assignments, special operations, possibly higher. You've earned it." She said nothing at first. The thought of it, of everything she'd wanted since her first day in uniform, felt surreal. "I just wanted to be treated the same," she said quietly. "You will be," he replied. "From now on you won't get easier treatment, you'll get harder. That's the price of proving you can take it." She smiled faintly. Wouldn't have it any other way. He stood slowly, wincing slightly at the bruise forming across his ribs. "For the record," he said, glancing at her, "you didn't just win today, you redefined the standard." When he walked away, Sarah sat for a while longer, listening to the hollow echo of his footsteps fade. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken again, the kind of blue that looked like bruised steel. She walked out into it, the cool air washing over her sweat-streaked skin. Around her, soldiers passed by, nodding, saluting, whispering, some with pride, some with disbelief. But she didn't need their validation anymore. What mattered had already happened on that mat. In that moment, when she'd looked into the eyes of the man who represented everything she was told she couldn't be, and made him yield to the truth of what she already was. That evening, the base commander called both of them in. Colonel Williams sat behind his desk, arms folded, expression serious. "I've read the reports. Seems today's demonstration was educational." Stone stood straight, professional. "Sergeant Martinez exceeded every expectation, sir." The colonel turned to Sarah. "You realize this event is already spreading beyond this base. The footage been requested by training divisions and higher command." Sarah's throat felt dry. "I didn't intend for that, sir." He smiled faintly. "The best moments rarely are. Your performance will be reviewed by multiple departments. Expect an invitation to selection evaluations within weeks." Stone added quietly, "She's ready." The colonel nodded. "I agree," dismissed. They saluted and left the office. Outside, Stone paused near the corridor. "You'll do fine," he said. "Just remember one thing." Sarah looked at him. "What's that?" "Respect isn't something you take. It's something you become." Then he turned and walked away into the shadowed hallway, leaving her standing there, tired, sore, but lighter somehow. Because for the first time in her career, she wasn't chasing respect anymore. She'd already earned it. And somewhere deep down, she knew the story of what happened today wouldn't just belong to her. It would belong to every soldier who'd ever been told you can't. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that silent act, one moment of truth, one perfectly timed strike, she hadn't just broken a man's ribs. She'd broken a barrier. Why did triumph always feel heavier after the cheering stopped? The next morning the base woke early, not because of orders or alarms, but because no one could stop talking. In the mess hall, in the barracks, on the firing range, every conversation circled back to the same story. The woman who'd made the SEAL leader tap out. Sarah heard fragments wherever she walked. 4 seconds before he hit the mat. Stone actually smiled afterward. She didn't even celebrate. She ate in silence, spoon moving through oatmeal gone cold, the noise washing around her like static. Respect felt strange. It used to be quiet, now it was deafening. When she stood, the voices softened automatically, like ripples retreating from a stone. She hated that part, the hush that followed her now. She wanted equality, not reverence. Outside, the morning fog clung low over the field. She headed there out of habit, craving motion, something ordinary. The same obstacle course where it had all begun, weighted, damp and empty. She ran it twice without stopping, not for time, just to remember who she'd been before the whispers changed tone. Halfway through the third lap, she saw Stone. He stood near the far end of the course, hands in his pockets, ribs still taped beneath his shirt. When she slowed, he waved her over. "You still running circles around the ghosts?" he asked. "Trying to outrun the noise," she replied. He nodded. "It never really goes away, it just changes shape." They stood in the morning quiet, neither speaking for a while. Then Stone said, "Command wants a full report by the end of the week, and they're sending an observer from Special Operations Command. You know what that means." "Selection," she said softly. "Yeah," he glanced at her, expression unreadable. "You'll get an official invitation soon. You can refuse it if you want." Sarah met his gaze. "Would you?" He gave a low chuckle that turned into a wince. "Not a chance." "Then neither will I." The following days blurred. Paperwork, evaluations, interviews that felt less like questions and more like dissection. Everyone wanted to understand how she'd done it, what she'd trained, what she'd studied, what mindset she'd carried into that fight. She gave them the truth. Years of discipline, obsession with improvement, no shortcuts. But that wasn't what they were looking for. They wanted a formula, something to replicate. She could see it in their faces, the hunger of institutions that find a miracle and try to make it standard issue. After the 10th interview, she stopped trying to explain. Excellence wasn't a checklist. It was a cost, and she'd already paid it. The invitation came officially 3 days later. Special Operations Assessment Program, Phase 1. Report in 2 weeks. The envelope was thin. Inside, one sheet of paper, one line of instruction. It didn't congratulate, it didn't reassure, it simply commanded. She folded it neatly and slid it into her locker beside her dog tags. For a long time she just stared at it, feeling the weight of quiet dreams turning into obligations. Rodriguez found her later that evening, leaning against the wall outside the gym. "Guess the rumors are true," he said, handing her a bottled water. "They're calling it the Martinez effect." She groaned. "Please tell me that's a joke." He grinned. "Afraid not. Every training unit wants to run their own version of the SEAL challenge. Half the base is trying to imitate your footwork. Then half the base is about to sprain their knees. He laughed, but she didn't. Her eyes stayed distant. "What's wrong?" he asked. She hesitated. "You ever wonder what happens after you win? Everyone cheers, but then they start watching for you to fall." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's when the real test starts." Selection came fast. 2 weeks later, she found herself standing at a new compound, stripped of rank insignia, just a number on a roster. 50 candidates. Men and women from every branch, every background. The instructors gave one order: prove it again. Day 1 broke half of them. Day 3 broke more. The days bled together: sand, cold, exhaustion, the constant hiss of instructors shouting and wind tearing across open ground. Sarah never shouted back. She moved with quiet determination, the same calm that had carried her through Stone's trials. She learned something crucial: emotion wastes oxygen. On the 7th night, after 20 hours without rest, an instructor crouched beside her in the mud and whispered, "Still think you belong here, Martinez?" She met his eyes, mud streaking her face. "Belonging's never the point, sir. Earning is." He said nothing, just nodded once and moved on. By the end of the 2nd week, only 12 candidates remained. Sarah among them. Her uniform was shredded, her fingers raw, but her mind was clearer than it had ever been. One evening, while the others slept, she sat alone by the equipment racks, watching the horizon fade into the first light of dawn. She thought of Stone, of the day he'd said, "You redefined the standard." She wondered if he knew that his words were what kept her upright now. The assessment ended on the 20th day. The instructors didn't announce who passed, they just called out numbers. When they reached hers, 17, they simply said, "Report for advanced placement. Congratulations." That was it. No applause, no handshake, just a nod in a file folder. As she packed, a strange emptiness settled over her. She reached another summit, but there was no view, just another climb waiting. Weeks later, she returned to the base for debriefing. The same compound, same hall, same smell of oil and dust. But the atmosphere had changed. Soldiers she barely knew greeted her with salutes. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to stand near her, as if proximity could transfer strength. In the corner of the hall, Stone waited. He looked healthier, ribs healed, confidence intact, but something in his eyes was different, softer. When she approached, he said simply, "I heard you made it." "I did." He nodded. "No one doubted you." She raised an eyebrow. "Not even you." He smiled faintly. "Especially not me." They walked together down the long hallway, where the lights flickered faintly. "Funny thing about legends," he said after a moment. "They start as accidents, then people rewrite them until the person inside disappears." She glanced at him. "You think that's happening now?" "I think people need symbols more than they need truth. But you still have a choice. You can be the symbol, or you can keep being the soldier." Sarah considered that. "Maybe I can be both." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe you can." They stopped near the exit. Outside, the sound of drills echoed across the yard, new recruits shouting cadence, boots pounding dirt. Another generation already chasing her shadow. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly, "before all the noise?" "Every day," he said. "But then I remember, someone has to stand in the noise long enough for the next person to find silence." She smiled, small and tired. "I'll try not to let it swallow me." He gave her a steady look. "It won't. You've already proven you know how to fight things you can't see." That night, alone in her quarters, Sarah opened her duffel and pulled out a single item she'd kept hidden, a folded photograph from years earlier. Basic training. Her first squad. Her younger self standing in the back row, uniform too big, eyes too hopeful. She ran a thumb over the faded print. That girl had wanted to be noticed. The woman holding the picture just wanted peace. Outside, wind rustled the flag atop the headquarters building. The sound was steady, familiar, like a heartbeat reminding her that no matter how high she climbed, the ground beneath her was the same dirt she'd started from. She whispered almost to herself, "Stay grounded, stay grateful." Then she tucked the photo back into her bag. Tomorrow she'd leave for the next assignment, classified, remote, demanding. But tonight she allowed herself one rare thing: stillness. For the first time in weeks, she let her shoulders drop, closed her eyes, and listened to the silence she'd earned. Months later, a quiet rumor traveled through the ranks. It said that Sergeant Martinez had joined a special operations task unit overseas, that she'd led missions under conditions too severe for reports to detail, that the woman who'd once been doubted by her own peers was now training the next wave of soldiers, men and women alike, to think differently about strength. No one knew for certain. The records were sealed, but sometimes, late at night, when trainees at the compound faced impossible drills, they swore they heard her name whispered among the instructors, spoken not with disbelief anymore, but with pride. And somewhere far from the noise, in a desert base where stars burned bright and wind carried the taste of dust, Sarah Martinez walked across the tarmac at dawn, helmet under one arm, flight bag in the other, heading toward a transport plane waiting in the sun. A new mission, a new unknown. She paused halfway up the ramp, turning for one last look at the horizon. The air shimmered with heat. For a moment, she saw the reflection of her younger self, the girl from the photo, watching her with quiet awe. Sarah smiled. "We made it." Then she boarded, the engines roared to life, and the desert swallowed the sound. Sometimes, history begins with a single defiance. Sometimes, change wears combat boots. And sometimes, the quietest victories echo the longest. Why did the silence before a mission always feel louder than gunfire? The wind hissed across the desert runway as Sarah adjusted her headset and stepped inside the C-130. The air inside the aircraft was cold, metallic, and smelled faintly of fuel and dust. Her new team was already strapped in, 6 operators, faces unreadable behind Nitop's gear. No insignia, no names, just code names and focus. She'd been briefed only hours ago, a short file half redacted. Target: insurgent leader responsible for civilian kidnappings. Location: deep border zone. Objective: capture and extract alive. But beneath the printed words lay what every operative learned to sense: the things unsaid. The real mission was never the one written on the paper. As the plane's engines rumbled to life, Sarah took a breath, feeling the vibration travel through her boots. She closed her eyes for a moment. For the first time since that day on the mat, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: the familiar weight of uncertainty. It wasn't fear, it was focus sharpening into purpose. The team leader, Carlson Rook, leaned toward her. "You've done field ops before, right?" She nodded, enough to know not to believe the briefing. He smirked faintly. "Good answer, then you'll fit." The lights dimmed. The roar deepened. The ramp closed behind them like the lid of a secret. Hours later, under a moonless sky, the team moved through the outskirts of a burned-out village. Their boots left soft impressions in the sand, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. The world here was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that meant eyes were already watching. Sarah scanned the rooftops through her night scope. Heat signatures, movement, not many but enough. 2 guards west wall, she whispered into comms, rotating every 30 seconds. "Copy," Rook replied. "Take the south flank, we'll breach north." She signaled her partner, Ghost, and they split off, weaving through narrow alleys that smelled of dust and gun oil. A dog barked somewhere distant, then went silent again. When they reached position, Sarah steadied her breathing. She could hear her pulse through the headset. "On my mark," Rook whispered. A heartbeat, another. Then mark. The night exploded into movement, suppressed fire, quick, precise bursts, shouts in a foreign tongue cut short. Sarah breached through a side door, clearing each room in a pattern burned into her reflexes. 1, 2, 3, clear. The fourth was. She froze. A child, maybe 8 years old, crouched in the corner, eyes wide, hands clutching a small doll. Not in the briefing, not in the plan. Sarah lowered her weapon slowly, whispering, "SHH, stay there, don't move." But the noise outside grew louder, more gunfire, heavier now. Through her earpiece, Martinez's status. She pressed her mic. "Civilians on site. I repeat, non-combatants present. Copy, proceed with caution." Her gut twisted. That was command speak for do what you have to do. She moved past the child, keeping her body between the danger and the small shape in the corner. The next room burst open, one hostile, AK leveled. She fired once. He dropped, silent. The ringing in her ears lingered longer than it should have. When the building cleared, she called it in. "Sector secure, civilian unharmed." "Good work," Rook said. "Package located. We're extracting in 5. "Copy." But Sarah didn't move. She looked at the child again, trembling, silent, doll clutched tight. The doll's dress was stained with dust and something darker. She crouched. "We're leaving, you come with me." The child hesitated, then reached out. Small hand, shaking, gripping hers with desperate strength. Sarah led her out into the cold night. When they reached the exfil truck, Rook saw them and frowned. That wasn't part of the op. Sarah didn't blink, neither was she. Rook stared for a moment, then nodded. "All right, get her on board." They lifted off 30 minutes later. The child fell asleep against Sarah's arm, exhaustion overpowering fear. As the desert faded below them, Rook leaned across the cabin. "You did good back there." Sarah looked down at the sleeping child. "Good feels like the wrong word." He nodded. "You'll get used to that feeling." But she never did. The mission report was labeled successful. The insurgent was captured, the team unharmed, one civilian extracted. Command congratulated them, efficiency praised, precision noted. No one mentioned the child's name. No one asked how she ended up there. No one cared what it cost Sarah to look into those eyes and see everything war forgets. That night Sarah sat alone outside the barracks, desert wind brushing against her face. The stars above seemed impossibly close, bright enough to touch. Rodriguez's voice came to mind. That's when the real test starts. He'd been right. Strength wasn't in winning fights anymore. It was in carrying what the victories left behind. Weeks passed, missions blurred, each one different, each one demanding something quieter from her, not muscle but conscience. There were nights when she couldn't sleep. The image of that child would return, small hands, wide eyes, trust given without reason. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was weight. One evening, after a long debrief, Stone's message came through secure line. "Heard you're running miracles again. Keep your head straight." She smiled faintly at the screen. She hadn't heard from him in months, but somehow he always knew when to reach out. She typed back, "Miracles come with paperwork." He replied a minute later, "Paperwork fades, character doesn't." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. By month's end, she was reassigned temporarily to oversee tactical training for recruits in theater, young soldiers, eyes still bright with adrenaline and ambition. They'd heard the stories. Some didn't even believe them. On her first day, one of them asked, "Ma'am, is it true you beat Master Chief Stone in open combat?" She paused, then said quietly, "I learned something that day. Every opponent has ribs. The real difference is who keeps their heart open after they break." The room went silent. She didn't tell them that victory had cost her pieces of herself. She didn't tell them about the nights she still woke up hearing echoes of gunfire and a child's breathing. Instead, she trained them the only way she knew how, not to be fearless, but to act through fear. 3 months later, she got word that the rescued child had been relocated, safe, healthy, living with relatives. A simple one-line report. She read it 3 times, then folded it carefully into her journal. That night she finally slept without dreams. But war never really ends. A new mission arrived, classified again, this time with fewer details and more silence. She read the orders, signed the form, and began packing. Before she left, she wrote a short note and slid it under Stone's nameplate back at HQ. No signature, just 3 lines. You once said truth reveals itself when the mask falls. I think you were right. But sometimes, the truth looks back and asks if you're still proud of it. She didn't know if he ever read it. As the plane lifted off for another undisclosed destination, she looked out at the horizon. The sky burned orange, the kind of color that made even war look almost beautiful for a moment. She thought about everything she'd learned, how strength wasn't loud, how leadership wasn't commanding, how survival wasn't the same as living. In the reflection of the window, she barely recognized herself anymore. Not because she'd changed, but because she'd finally become the person she was always supposed to be. A soldier. A woman. A quiet storm that refused to be contained. Sometimes, the loudest victories are the ones no one sees. And as the engines roared beneath her, Sarah Martinez closed her eyes and whispered to herself, not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as someone who'd finally understood the cost of both. Dignity doesn't need witnesses. The horizon swallowed the plane as it rose higher, until all that was left was sky, vast, silent, endless. Why did peace feel heavier than war? The airbase was different now. Months had passed since her last mission, but the desert still smelled the same: diesel, dust, and distance. Sarah stood on the edge of the runway watching a convoy roll out, tires cutting faint trails through the sand. Somewhere inside those trucks sat soldiers younger than she'd been when she started, wide-eyed, restless, certain that courage would make them invincible. She envied them a little, not their ignorance, just their clarity, before the world had shades of gray. A voice came from behind. You planning to salute the horizon all day? Stone, older somehow, but still built like he'd been carved from the same material as the base itself. His ribs had healed, though every once in a while he still rubbed the spot unconsciously. Sarah turned. Didn't expect to see you out here. Command sent me to review the new training doctrine, he said, holding up a folder. Apparently someone rewrote half the manual. She smiled faintly, guilty. He flipped through the pages. Less yelling, more thinking. You'll ruin the mystique. Maybe mystique was overrated. He closed the folder, studying her. How long has it been since you slept properly? She looked back toward the horizon. Long enough that silence feels like a stranger. Stone stepped beside her. For a while neither spoke. The sun burned low, turning the sky into copper. Finally he said, you did good work out there. The teams you trained, they're sharper, calmer, different. Sarah's voice was quiet. Different isn't always better. In this case it is. You taught them that strength doesn't mean shouting. That's rarer than people think. She didn't answer. Words felt unnecessary. After a moment he added, you know, Command's talking about offering you an instructor position, permanent, stateside. No more sand, no more ghosts. She laughed softly. You saying I'm ready for a desk? I'm saying you've earned the right to stop proving things. The idea hung between them like dust in sunlight. Rest, a word she'd never trusted. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Later that night she walked the perimeter alone, listening to the hum of generators and the far-off murmur of radios. Every base at night sounded the same, metal breathing, electricity whispering through fences. It was oddly comforting. At the far edge, near the observation tower, she found a patch of silence. No voices, no engines, just wind. She sat down on a crate and opened her small field journal. The pages were worn, corners folded, ink smudged by sweat and rain. Inside were fragments of every mission, coordinates, half-sentences, thoughts she'd never spoken aloud. Sometimes courage looks like stillness. Sometimes mercy wears camouflage. Sometimes victory feels like grief in uniform. She turned to the last blank page and wrote one final line. "If I disappear tomorrow, let them remember the silence more than the noise." She closed the book and slid it back into her pack. Morning arrived with a briefing she hadn't expected. A transport helicopter downed in hostile territory. No confirmed survivors, no confirmation of loss. Her old team, Rook's unit. Command wanted her on the recovery mission. She hesitated only a second before saying yes. The desert welcomed her back with the same indifferent heat. Hours of searching turned into days. They found wreckage, scattered gear, signs of struggle, and then, buried half-collapsed under debris, a signal beacon still blinking. Inside the wreckage they found Rook, alive but broken, one arm shattered, voice hoarse. He stayed with the others until rescue arrived. 3 men gone, 2 saved. When Sarah knelt beside him, he tried to grin through cracked lips. "Knew you'd show up. Couldn't let the legend fade, huh?" She gripped his hand. "Legends don't matter, people do." He whispered, "Then promise me something. Don't let what we do turn you cold." She didn't answer. She just squeezed his hand tighter as medics carried him away. That night back at base, she watched the sun set through the hospital tent's thin plastic walls. The color of the sky reminded her of every mission before this one. Same beauty, same cost. She finally understood what Stone had meant years ago. Strength wasn't how you fought. It was how you stayed human afterward. She walked to the communications post and sent a single message to Stone. "I think I'm done." The reply came minutes later. "Then come home." Home wasn't where she'd left it. Cities had changed, faces had aged, the world had kept spinning. She moved into a small house near a lake, where mornings smelled of pine instead of diesel. At first the quiet unnerved her. Then she learned to listen to it. She started teaching part-time at an academy for new recruits, leadership, tactics, field ethics. Not war stories, but lessons, awareness, restraint, empathy. The cadets respected her, though most had no idea who she really was. That suited her fine. Sometimes, after class, she'd walk down to the lake and watch the reflection of the sky ripple across the water. The sound of distant jets still made her turn her head, but the reflex softened with time. One afternoon, a student approached her after dismissal. Young, nervous, eyes full of questions. "Ma'am," he said, "is it true you once fought the SEAL leader and won?" Sarah smiled faintly. "That's what they tell people." "Then how did you do it?" She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "By not trying to win, by trying to understand." He frowned slightly, confused. She added, "Sometimes understanding is stronger than force. Remember that." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that meant he might spend years figuring out what she meant. When he left, she watched him go, realizing the same thought had carried her entire career. Every battle she'd survived began with that quiet decision, to understand before striking. Months later, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photo, Stone standing beside a new class of operators. On the back, his handwriting. "Still learning from you." She smiled, tucked it into her journal beside the old photograph of her younger self, and whispered, "Still learning from you, too." Years passed. The stories faded into rumor, then memory. New soldiers replaced old names. The world found new wars to tell. But sometimes, in quiet corners of training halls or late-night barracks talks, someone would mention the woman who'd changed the rules without ever raising her voice. No one knew where she was now. Some said she retired. Others claimed she was still out there, working quietly in the places no headlines reached. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was what she'd left behind. A way of standing, a way of thinking, a quiet proof that strength could be graceful. One winter morning, the lake froze over. Sarah stepped onto the porch, wrapped in a worn jacket, coffee steaming in her hands. The world was silent except for the soft groan of ice expanding. She looked out across the glass-smooth surface and saw her reflection, older, calm, finally at peace. She thought of everyone who had walked beside her, Rodriguez with his humor, Rook with his grit, Stone with his relentless faith, the nameless child she'd carried from that burning house. Each one a lesson, each one still with her. She whispered to the wind, "You are all worth it." The breeze answered by stirring the trees, scattering a few snowflakes across the frozen water. She smiled. Maybe that was the only reply she needed. As the day warmed, she walked down to the lake's edge. The surface shimmered like glass, catching the sunlight in silver lines. She knelt, pressed her fingertips against the ice and closed her eyes. In the distance, a plane passed overhead, small, distant, the sound fading quickly. But in that moment she felt everything converge, every mission, every doubt, every heartbeat that had led her here. For years she'd fought to prove she belonged. Then she'd fought to prove she was strong. Now she understood, belonging wasn't earned through combat and strength wasn't measured by victory. It was in the quiet choice to remain human when the world asked you not to be. She stood, turned toward the house, and started back up the hill. Each step crunched softly against the frost. The air tasted clean, weightless. At the door she paused and looked back one last time. The lake gleamed behind her, the sky stretching wide and endless. A new kind of mission awaited, life itself. And as she stepped inside, closing the door behind her, the narrator's voice, soft, steady, reflective, would have carried the final words. Sometimes courage doesn't shout across battlefields. Sometimes it whispers in quiet rooms. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts and then it rests. The wind outside sighed against the window. The story of Sarah Martinez ended not with thunder but with peace, the rarest victory of all.